All right, so today we're going to try something a little different. We're going to see what happens when, well, Oscar Wilde's wit meets channeled wisdom about the cosmos.
Yeah, sounds like a fun experiment.
Right. So we're looking at the importance of being earnest, Wilde's play, the one about mistaken identities and all those hilarious social mix-ups. And then we're going to look at the law of one, which is a pretty deep dive into, well, reality, consciousness, the big stuff.
A juxtaposition of epic proportions, some might say. Drawing room comedy meets cosmic instruction manual. But hey, that's what makes this so interesting, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you, our listener, brought these two sources together.
Exactly. You had a hunch there might be something worth exploring here.
Yeah.
Maybe there is. We're not trying to force a connection or anything, but we are looking for, well, resonances, maybe some surprising contrasts.
Yeah, like how do these two works coming from such different places, how do they approach the whole human experience? What does it mean to exist? What matters? All that good stuff.
So let's set the scene right. With the importance of being earnest, we're in this world of sparkling wit, those rapid fire exchanges, mistaken identities, and just social absurdity turned up to 11. We've got Jack Worthing, who's leading this double life, super respectable guardian out in the country. Then he turns into this made-up character, Ernest, in the city, total playboy. Then there's Algernon, always coming up with this sick friend, Bunbury, just so he can get out of social obligations. It's brilliant.
Classic avoidance strategy.
And the kicker is that both Jack's ward, Cecily, and Algernon's cousin, Gwendolyn, are fixated on marrying a guy named Ernest. Apparently the name just screams, reliable, romantic, the whole package.
It's like the name itself has some kind of mystical power, right?
Right. And then, of course, you've got all the Wildean touches, the cucumber sandwiches causing social meltdowns, Lady Bracknell grilling potential husbands about their family tree, whether they were left in a handbag at a train station. It's just pure, delightful social satire.
Exquisitely crafted chaos, you could say.
Absolutely. Then on the flip side, we have the law of one. And this is where things get, well, cosmic. This is a series of channeled conversations, right, through an individual and a group with this entity they call Ra. And Ra describes itself as, well, a social memory complex from the Confederation of Planets, basically a collective consciousness of super advanced beings. And they're sharing information, for the good of the universe.
Yeah, serving the infinite creator.
And the topics they cover, the nature of reality, densities of consciousness, like levels of spiritual evolution, it gets pretty heavy. We're talking about the harvest, a kind of graduation to higher levels of awareness. And then there's this idea that all is one. That's the law of one. It's all about interconnectedness.
Yeah.
But the thing is, even Ra admits that trying to express these high-level concepts in human language, well, it's tricky. There are bound to be limitations.
Lost in translation, in a sense.
Exactly. So we've got these two very different worlds. On one hand, you have Wilde poking fun at society with all its rules and pretenses. On the other hand, you have Ra offering this vast metaphysical perspective on the universe and our place in it.
And who knows, maybe putting them side by side will reveal something new.
Exactly. Maybe we'll see things we wouldn't have noticed otherwise. Maybe we'll find that despite their differences, they're actually exploring some of the same questions about, who we are, what we value, how we make sense of the world.
And hopefully we'll have a good time doing it.
Of course. So let's jump in, shall we? First, let's talk about illusion and deception. It's a pretty big theme in both works, but in very different ways, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, totally. I mean, in Earnest, it's front and center, right? The entire plot spins on these elaborate deceptions. Jack with his earnest act, Algernon with his imaginary friend Bunbury, always popping up at the most convenient times.
It's also cleverly done. And they're not just little white lies, are they? We're talking about entire identities fabricated to navigate social expectations, get what they want. Jack gets to be the dutiful guardian and the charming rogue. Algernon gets to avoid anything remotely dull. And the best part? They pull it off.
Right, and it's not just them, is it? Think about Gwendolyn and Cecily. They're obsessed with the name Ernest. They don't even care who the guy really is. It's like the name itself is this guarantee of happiness. They're buying into this illusion, this idea of who Ernest is supposed to be.
It's classic Wilde, right?
Yeah.
Poking fun at how society gets hung up on superficial stuff.
Yeah.
And how we're all creating these little fictions, these personas to get by. But then you look at the law of one, and the concept of illusion becomes, well, because it's this fundamental aspect of reality.
Right. Reyes talks about this veil that separates us from higher truths. It's not something we create consciously. It's built into this density of consciousness, our
Hmm.
physical reality, and it's there for a reason, you know? It allows us to experience things, to make choices, to learn
Mm.
without being overwhelmed by the knowledge of who we really are, where we came from, all that.
So in a way, it's like we're all playing a part in this cosmic drama. We've got these roles, these limitations, and we're learning and growing through the experience.
Exactly. It's about evolution, right? Moving towards greater understanding. And that's why free will comes in. Because with this veil, we get to choose. We get to decide who we want to be, what we want to learn.
Which brings us back to Ernest. Because even though the deceptions in the play are, pretty lighthearted, it makes you wonder, are they reflecting something deeper? This human tendency to create illusions, maybe on a smaller scale, but still.
Yeah.
Like, are our social masks, the roles we play, are those part of how we maintain this veil, even if we're not aware of it?
That's an interesting way to look at it. Like maybe the seemingly trivial deceptions are actually tapping into this bigger idea about the nature of reality itself.
Right. And it makes you think, as our listener, how much of what you experience is actually, illusion.
Mm.
And who's creating it? You, society. Or is it something bigger, something more fundamental?
It's a good question to ponder. Speaking of, well, labels and things, both Wilde and The Law of One have some interesting things to say about the whole idea of names and labels.
Right.
I mean, in Wilde's play, names carry a lot of weight, a lot of meaning.
Oh, absolutely. The name Ernest is practically a character in itself. Gwendolyn and Cecily are completely fixated on it. It's like they've imbued it with all these qualities, all these expectations.
And it's hilarious because it's so absurd, right? They're projecting all these ideals onto a name without even knowing the guy. It's Wilde at his best, satirizing the superficiality of Victorian society. You know how they judge people based on titles, family connections, all that nonsense?
Exactly. It's all about appearances. But then you jump to the Law of One, and the perspective on names becomes really fascinating. Because Ra is very clear that even the names they use, like Ra itself or the Confederation of Planets, they're just simplifications.
Right. They're saying, look, human language is limited. It can only go so far in describing these higher dimensional realities. Like the Confederation of Planets is just a way for us to wrap our heads around this incredibly complex, what they call it a sound vibration understanding.
So on one hand, you have Wilde showing how we can get completely caught up in the surface meaning of names. And on the other, you have Ra saying, hey, even the names we use to describe the vastness of the cosmos, they're just approximations. Don't get too hung up on them.
It's a good reminder to not take things too literally. To remember that language, labels, they're just tools. They can be helpful, but they can also be limiting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about how much of our reality is shaped by the language we use, the labels we apply. Are we sometimes like Gwendolyn and Cecily, attaching all this significance to words when they can only ever be, well, a pale reflection of the real thing?
That's a good question to consider. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about rules. Social conventions versus cosmic laws. It's another area where these two sources offer some interesting contrasts.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that nobody embodies the rigid adherence to social conventions quite like Lady Bracknell in Ernest. She is the queen of propriety. Her interview with Jack when he proposes to Gwendolyn, it's legendary. She's got this whole checklist, right? Family background, financial status, social connections, and heaven forbid you have any connection to, well, railway stations.
Right, the horror. She is just so obsessed with these arbitrary rules, these social hierarchies, and it's also wonderfully ridiculous, right? Wilde is basically saying, look how absurd these conventions are.
Exactly. He's holding up a mirror to society,
Yeah.
showing how these rules can be, well, utterly meaningless, yet people still cling to them.
Yeah.
But then you look at the Law of One, and there's this whole different concept of laws. Laws that govern the universe, consciousness, everything.
Right. Rhea talks about the law of one, this fundamental principle of unity, of interconnectedness. And then there's the law of free will, which is all about choice, about the right to learn and grow through experience.
And these laws aren't arbitrary, are they? They're not just made up by some society or group. They're presented as these fundamental principles woven into the fabric of existence.
Yeah. They're like the operating system of the universe, guiding evolution, shaping reality.
So you've got these two extremes, right? The hyper-specific, often ridiculous rules of Victorian society,
Yeah.
and then these vast cosmic laws that govern everything. Makes you wonder, what's the relationship between them? Are social conventions just like pale imitations of these deeper, more fundamental laws, or are they something else entirely?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, and it gets even more interesting when you consider that Wilde's play is called The Importance of Being Earnest. A trivial comedy for serious people, to be exact.
Oh, that subtitle. Pure genius.
Mhm.
Because the whole play is about taking these seemingly trivial matters, cucumber sandwiches, names, social blunders, and treating them with the utmost seriousness.
Right. It's like he's saying, look how much energy we pour into these things that ultimately don't matter.
Exactly. And he's doing it with such wit, such charm, that you can't help but laugh at yourself, and how easily we get caught up in the minutiae of life. But then you look at the law of one, and it kind of flips the script, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because from Rye's perspective, a lot of what we consider serious, material possessions, social status, all that, it's kind of trivial in the grand scheme of things.
Right. They even say explicitly that, details about things like manufacturing plants totally irrelevant compared to understanding the law of one, which isn't to say that those things don't matter at all,
Mhm.
but it does offer a different perspective on what truly matters, what has lasting significance.
It's like Wilde is using comedy to show how we blow things out of proportion. And Ra is offering this cosmic perspective that says, hey, focus on what really matters.
Mm.
Your spiritual growth, your connection to the universe, to the one.
And it's not to say that one perspective is right and the other is wrong. It's more about recognizing that there are different ways of seeing things. And maybe, by considering both, we can get a more complete picture.
Absolutely. And for you, our listener, it's about asking yourself, what do you consider serious? What truly matters to you? And does that align with, well, a broader perspective, a cosmic perspective?
It's a good question to ask yourself. Now, another thing that pops up in both these sources is communication, right? The challenges of understanding each other, of getting the message across.
Oh, yeah. And in earnest, it's all about misunderstandings. Deliberate or accidental, they drive the plot. Algernon and Cecily inventing this engagement out of thin air. Two Ernest showing up at the same time, causing total chaos. It's all hilarious.
Right. It's a comedy of errors. But it does make you think about how easily communication can break down, even in everyday situations, how much can get lost in translation, even when we think we're being clear.
Exactly. And then you look at the law of one, and the challenges of communication become, well, almost cosmic in scale.
Yeah.
Because Rod is very upfront about the limitations of trying to convey these high-level concepts through human language. They even talk about the narrow band of communication between densities, the potential for distortion.
Right. They're saying, look, we're doing our best to get this information across, but there's always a chance something will be lost, misinterpreted.
Which makes you think about how much we take for granted.
Right.
The way we communicate, the assumptions we make, it's not always as straightforward as we think.
Yeah.
And whether it's a misunderstanding about a fictitious brother or a misinterpretation of a channeled message about the universe, it all points to the same thing. Communication is fragile, it requires effort, attention, and even then, there's always room for error.
It's a good reminder to be humble, right? To approach communication with an open mind and a willingness to listen.
Absolutely. And it also makes you think about how much we rely on language to understand the world, to make sense of our experiences, and what happens when language falls short.
It's a good question. And it leads us nicely into our final theme, which is growth and evolution. Because both Ernest and the Law of One touch on this idea, albeit in very different ways.
Yeah, I mean, Ernest isn't exactly a story about profound personal transformation. But the characters do learn some things, right? Jack discovers his true identity. The romantic entanglements sort themselves out, albeit in a rather chaotic way.
It's a comedic resolution, but there's a sense that things have shifted, that the characters have, well, evolved in some way.
Right. Even if it's just a shift in perspective, a realization about themselves or their relationships. But then you look at the law of one, and evolution is the central theme. The whole idea of densities and progressing through these levels of consciousness, it's all about growth, about moving towards greater understanding, greater connection.
And it's not just about individual growth. It's about the evolution of consciousness itself, moving towards unity, towards the realization of the Law of One.
And it's a long process, right? Spanning lifetimes, maybe even eons.
Yeah.
But it's happening. And what's fascinating is that the law of one suggests that we have a role to play in this evolution, that our choices matter, our actions have an impact.
Right. It's not just something that happens to us. We're active participants.
So even though Ernest is a comedy, it makes you wonder, can these seemingly trivial experiences, these social blunders, these romantic misadventures, can they still contribute to our growth? Can they still teach us something about ourselves, about the world?
Maybe they can. Maybe even those moments of absurdity, those times when we feel lost or confused, maybe those are opportunities to learn, to grow, to evolve.
It's a good thought. And it brings us to the end of our little experiment, bringing together the importance of being earnest and the law of one.
Yeah.
It's quite a journey, wouldn't you say?
It has. We've covered a lot of ground: illusion, deception, names, labels, social rules, cosmic laws, the whole idea of what matters. And maybe, just maybe, we've seen these concepts in a new light.
Exactly. We've explored how both Wilde and Ra, in their own unique ways, are grappling with these fundamental questions about the human experience, about who we are, why we're here, what it all means.
And now it's your turn, dear listener. We leave you with this final question. In a world that might be more illusory than we realize, how much importance should we place on the earnest pursuit of, well, seemingly trivial matters? Can we find meaning and growth in the everyday, the absurd, the unexpected? Or are we just chasing cucumber sandwiches in a cosmic play?
It's something to think about. And as always, the best answers often come from exploring diverse perspectives, from venturing outside our comfort zones. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.